Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read some house rules out first of all. Welcome to this Art Deco Society UK webinar with Dr. Kathryn Ferry. We're so pleased that so many people could join us tonight. And as I say, some people will be registered just to receive the recording so they can watch later. And we hope to get a link out to people within the next 24 hours, all being well. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kevin Trickett. I'm actually the Art Deco Society's Yorkshire and Humber regional representative. So if you've been to one of our events in our region, you might have seen me. The first thing to say for anybody watching at home is that we now have this splendid invention of closed captions, sometimes known as subtitles. So if you find your toolbar and click on the CC button, that will bring up some subtitles. Now, a warning, they're not 100% accurate. They don't seem to fare very well with my Yorkshire accent. So they're on a guide though and can be really useful if the sound should drop out for a moment. The subtitles are usually there. Next, this is a webinar format. So we can't see you at home, but you should be able to see myself and our guest speaker, Kathryn. So it doesn't matter if you're in pajamas, drinking wine or lying on the sofa, we can't see you. So feel free to relax and don't worry about that. Nor can we hear you. So at the end of the presentation, we'll be doing a Q&A session, but the only way for you to get your questions to us is to click on the Q&A button on the toolbar and type your question in. And don't wait to the very end. If you have a question that pops into your head, ask it as we go and we'll have a look through them and try and answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Right. Just bear in mind, Kathryn's our guest, so be thoughtful and considerate when asking your questions. And I'm sure Kathryn will do her best to answer what she can. Right, so this evening, that's the end of house rules. We've got Dr. Kathryn Ferry, a historian who specialises in the architectural and cultural history of the seaside. She is the author of books on beach huts, seaside holidays and bungalows, as well as the official history of Butlins, which I have here and can highly recommend. If you've got fond memories of going to Butlins for your holidays, as I have as a child, then that's the one to go for. Her latest book, though, is Seaside 100, A History of the British Seaside in 100 Objects, published by Unicorn in 2020. She loves Art Deco and is well known on Twitter as a fan of the 1930s beach pajamas. And I follow Kathryn avidly, and she even follows me back. So with that, Kathryn, I'm going to fall silent and hand over to you to say hello and then start sharing your slides.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Kevin. Okay, let's make a start. I'm just going to share my slides, which I hope you've got there. Let's go to that. There we go. Is that all right, Kevin? Got that?
That's fine. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Right. Okay, so the title, Designing for a New Social Phenomenon, that comes from a quote in the Daily News Chronicle of June 1937. And I'm going to read that out. Thousands of people are having a new kind of holiday. A major social phenomenon is making its appearance all over the face of Britain, altering the age-old manner of the English holiday. The name of the phenomenon is the holiday camp. So holiday camps really belong to a distinct phase in British history. Really, either side of World War II was their heyday. In numerical terms, the majority of camps were quite small, mostly independently run, and there were some notable concentrations. So on Hayling Island, for example, in Hampshire, on the coastline of North Wales around Rhyl, and on the Suffolk-Norfolk border around Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth, there were lots of clustered huts up there as well. And one of those is this one. You will recognise this picture from the booking information online. This is the front cover of the 1939 brochure for Corton Beach Holiday Camp, beach underlined because there were other holiday camps at Corton. I'm going to look at why holiday camps proved so popular, and as well how they use design to promote the modernity of their product. So if you just look at this one, you can see that wonderful Art Deco sunburst behind these two healthy, young-looking people. They're wearing the latest fashion in swimwear. They're sporting in the open air. It's all very tied into notions about leisure at the period. If we look at the number of guests that there were per camp, then the chains become far more significant. And that's why most Britons have heard of Butlins. The other ones are Warners and Pontins in particular. And those operators had multiple sites. Some of them could be as big as a small town, in fact, particularly in the case of Butlins. But that doesn't mean that Billy Butlin invented the holiday camp. He didn't. The idea actually goes back to the Victorian era, and its true inventors were a couple from Liverpool called Joseph and Elizabeth Cunningham. They were Presbyterians, and they actually began organising summer camps for the Florence Institute in Toxteth. And that was in order to take underprivileged boys away for a seaside camp, which was on the Isle of Man near Douglas. Unfortunately, they consistently failed to cover their costs, so they were sacked as superintendents of this, of the Florence Institute. And they, however, realised that they were onto something with the camping idea. And so they decided, rather than doing it on a charitable basis, to do it as a business. And from 1894, they replaced the drills and tent inspections with what was effectively an open-air hotel service. You can see some of their guests on the left-hand side of this screen. Importantly, they still maintained their original ethos. So it was men only. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol, using proper language. There was no gambling involved. And yet they were incredibly successful. They moved to a new site in 1904, and that's the site you can see on the right-hand side, which covered 5 acres, and it included a dining hall for 1,600 men. So all of those bell tents there that you can see are all full of the campers who would all dine together. They established a golden rule for future holiday camps, and that was really to keep the sleeping accommodation simple, as you can see here, so as to maintain an affordable, all-inclusive tariff. The men who slept in these tents had access to a wide range of facilities, including dark rooms, miniature golf, a swimming pool heated by the exhaust steam from the camp's own generators, a concert hall and a cinema. Their services, so basically the sort of washing services and toilets, were in this structure here with the battlements, which also served as an outlook across the Douglas Bay. And you can actually see, if you look closely, there's a light that they could shine across the bay on the top of that little tower there. Importantly, the tent life helped create a sense of companionship that transcended the different social backgrounds of the men who were, and teenagers who were coming to stay. So middle and working class men would all effectively have the same experience when they got there. They'd all join in singing the camp song. By 1936, they were catering for 60,000 campers a year. And actually, Billy Butlin made a fact-finding trip to Douglas to see how they did it. Sadly, they never reopened after World War II. I think social norms had moved on, but they had really started a movement. Next came the Caister Socialist Camp, and you can tell obviously about the ethos of that in its very name. It was begun in 1906 by a man called John Fletcher Dodd. You can see he's the honorary secretary down there in the bottom right-hand corner. In 1906, he put up 3 bell tents and invited 10 trade unionist friends to come down to the Norfolk coast from London's East End. Now, campers would staff the site themselves, so it was all about community, togetherness, and an opportunity to discuss and debate socialist ideals. On top of that, they were giving working people a cheap holiday, and I think sort of trying to inculcate their socialist views in among these people while they were sort of a captive audience. In 1906, Dodd formed the Great Yarmouth branch of the Independent Labour Party, and he was able to get such luminaries as George Bernard Shaw, Keir Hardie, Bertrand Russell to speak at his Sunday evening lectures, which was something of a highlight for campers. In 1912, he bought more land and he filled it with wooden huts. And you can see a little image of him in the bottom left-hand corner on this badge. There he is with his pipe and his moustache. There was a high demand for places. In the end, that meant accepting a new commercial reality, employing staff, and the kind of social collective effort that's on that right hand, the rear of the postcard, gave way really to paying customers who increasingly came from the professional and business classes. But it was really influential, this camp. What became clear, however, was that camps with a social conscience were better run by cooperative societies and trade unions. So really bodies that potential campers already had a stake in. And that's where the next development comes in. So this is we're back at Coulton near Lowestoft. This is the first civil service holiday camp, which opened in 1924. W.J. Brown stayed at Caister in Dodds Camp in his youth, and he later used his influence as the General Secretary of the Civil Service Clerical Association to promote the idea to members. His executive committee got a bit cold feet in the end, but Brown actually raised the necessary capital himself and opened the camp in 1924, charging 2 guineas per adult per week. It was so successful that the first season was fully booked, and he was actually turning away people the following year. So he looked for another site, and he found one on Hayling Island, which is very close to Havant in Hampshire, and that opened in 1930. And it sort of started this move by other unions to set up their own holiday camp. So in 1931, we get these two. On the left, this is the Croyd Bay Holiday Camp that was set up by NALGO, the National Association of Local Government Officers. And it actually still exists. It doesn't look quite like that. It was a very simple construction back in the 1930s, but it's still owned by Unison as the successors to NALGO. So that is still in existence. Unfortunately, the Coventry Cooperative Camp in Rhyl is no more. That closed in the 1970s. But there's a lot of people in Coventry who have very fond members of it, because it was just for the members of the Coventry Co-op. It was near Rhyl on the North Wales coast, and started off as being very basic, but places became highly sought after. It was, sort of at the end of the train ride from Coventry, and co-op members would queue at the camp office every February to get the best weeks, often when the factories in Coventry were closed down. And the same families went back year after year. There is still a sort of static caravan park on the site, but it doesn't have any more the links that it did with Coventry. Alongside these communal endeavours, commercial camps were coming into being after the First World War. Someone called Herbert Potter, who was another entrepreneur inspired by Fletcher Dodd's socialist camp, after he was demobbed from the army, he won some prize money in a newspaper competition, and he used that to launch his own holiday camp at Hemsby on the Norfolk coast. He opened back in 1920 with wooden huts instead of tents, so he's sort of in the vanguard. But these chalets at Brystone Holiday Camp on the Isle of Wight, these are actually now the oldest surviving holiday camp chalets in the country. They were opened in 1931, and the camp was run by a London-based company called Campers Limited, very imaginative, who invested a capital of £10,000. They then went on to build 2 more camps in 1934 in Kent and Norfolk. So this camp, you can see the sea in the background of this photograph, which is taken a few years ago. The sea is there because they're literally on the edge of the cliff, and sadly they are kind of falling into the cliff. I tried to get these listed because I consider them to be pretty important in the holiday camp story, but sadly Historic England did not agree with me. The camp could accommodate about 200 people, so it's a relatively small one, but it had its sort of place in the history of the genre. Now, the thing about the development of camps over the next decade was the importance of transport infrastructure, because for the development of the seaside up to the interwar years, it was really linked to trains. And holiday camps were generally built on the edge of existing resorts where the land was cheapest. And that meant you needed transport to get from resorts to those places, because they weren't very close to the existing railway stations. And that's where the charabancs and the early motor coaches in the 1920s and 30s really led to the proliferation, or helped the proliferation of holiday camps. And that was certainly the case for Hayling Island, because the rail link was quite simple, just a sort of narrow gauge link. And so it really relied on getting lots of people by bus onto the island, and then the holiday camps just grew in number. Now I'm referring to Hayling Island because it's the first place that Captain Harry Warner built a holiday camp. He came from Kennington in London. Here he is on the left. He served in the Royal Artillery for almost 20 years. And in the First World War, he became friends with a fellow soldier, a chap called Lawrence Stokes, who came from Havant. Havant's very near Hayling Island. He went to visit his friend, fell in love with his friend's sister, who became his wife. And the couple went on a day trip to Hayling Island. They saw a cafe that was for sale called the Grotto. And they sort of came up with a lovely plan for Harry to return to civilian life, use his military pension to buy the business. And he was, he clearly had an entrepreneurial bent, because they saw very close to the Grotto the civil service holiday camp that I've shown you, that I've spoken about previously. And the cafe was selling to campers their scones, their sandwiches and ice creams. But they thought they could actually cater for their own campers, but they didn't have enough money to start with. What was important was the input of another entrepreneur to help Harry realise his dream. And that entrepreneur is on the right-hand side, a caricature of Billy Butlin there, sitting on one of his bumper cars. Because by the time they met in about 1931, Billy Butlin was already on the way to being a very wealthy man, because he had started off in the fairgrounds and then developed, as you can see from this image, a chain of amusement parks, mostly by the seaside. And it was at his Bognor Regis amusement park that he met Harry Warner. They got chatting, and Butlin offered to buy the bulk of Warner's land on Hayling Island in order to set up an amusement park there. That gave Harry Warner the money he wanted to open Northney Holiday Camp. He bought the farm at Northney, and he converted the main barn into a restaurant with waiter service. So you can see the dining hall in the top of this wonderful postcard. And again, it was about 200 people. The outbuildings of the farm became the bar and entertainments room. He set up 100 wooden chalets. Actually, where it says the club, there's the old barn. You can very clearly see that is a barn, even though you've got the parasols outside. And he created a bathing pool in the sea. I think of the postcard here as a succinct way of expressing the delights of your holiday to family and friends back home. And a multi-view like this just kind of sums up all the wonders of the place in one. You've got down the bottom the attractive bed covers in the chalet, the people having fun, the pristine white tablecloths in the dining room. And on the back, of course, you've got the message, which on this one, according to Dorry, who is writing to the folks back home, she was having quite a good time here in spite of the dull weather. Peggy has first prize for best ankles. So good on you, Peggy. Because even from the outset, you can see the sports day there, the tennis courts, there's that sort of competitive community element happening to get people to meet each other and to enjoy a kind of community spirit. Warner's set out to offer a week's holiday for less than a week's wage. Now, Harry Warner and Billy Butlin, we know they knew each other and they became competitors, but they were friends as well. And for a time, they were also partners. Billy Butlin could absolutely see the promise of holiday camps, and Warner had the experience of creating and running one. So in 1933, they set up a company together, and they built a camp with 150 chalets at Seaton on the South Devon coast, which opened in 1935. And you can see this is a purpose-built camp. So there's a bit already more design thought in that entrance reception building. It's very simple again, and we've just got the very simple chalets, but nonetheless, you can see they're thinking about it in a different way. This is not a conversion as it was on Hayling Island. The thing was about the two men, Warner always believed that he wanted to keep his site small and therefore more friendly, and he stuck to that business model. Billy Butlin, on the other hand, worked on the premise of getting a small amount of profit from a larger number of people. And that meant that as soon he was ready to make progress under his own name. Now, why were holiday camps increasingly popular in this period? Well, here are some of the key answers. Freedom from the seaside landlady. She looks a little bit on the stern side, whether or not she's the sort of battle axe stereotype. We're not quite sure from this image, but the fact was that the majority of people in this era were used to staying in boarding houses where they were under the sort of rules of the landlady. And people had got a bit tired of that. When you stayed in a boarding house, you had to come in for all your meals, and you had to go out during the day when the landlady threw you out in between times, and everything else outside on the seafront you had to pay for. In the holiday camp, you paid one price that covered everything. So that was really important. And of course, you got on-site entertainments, which was something that was a real bonus. And holiday camps were considered a bit of a revolution, in leisure during the 1930s. And that really is summed up in this image from Butlins of 1936. The luxury you've dreamt about can be realised at Butlins. Billy Butlin was already quite early thinking about the construction of his first solo holiday camp at Skegness. And the imagery here, he was a master of advertising. As a young man, he worked in the advertising department of a big department store in Canada, and he had learned about sort of publicity techniques. And throughout his career, you really see that very much come to fruition. Here's another image from the same brochure. He was very clear about what he wanted to offer people. It was affordable luxury, modern design, that all-inclusive package with top facilities, a range of activities that were free to take part in once you got there, and individual chalets to allow for relaxation. You didn't have to be doing something all the time. You could, but you didn't have to. Of course, I've just told you that other people were already doing this, but they were doing it on a much smaller scale. And that's really the difference with Butlins. The lure for the people who chose Butlins was the value for money. It wasn't a cheap holiday. I think that's a misconception that people have. And the Daily News Chronicle recognised it as being essentially democratic in spirit. They said, here there is no snob or class distinction. You cannot spend more, save in riding or drinking, than your neighbour. If you come in a car, it's 10 to 1. You will not use it until you go. So everyone was had access to all the same things. And that was really important. And this image, I think, also draws direct parallels to the most popular mass leisure activity of the era, pulling back those curtains. It's the cinema, of course, and it's introducing Skegness Holiday Camp as a kind of movie land that's open to you. In 1939, 990 million cinema tickets were sold in a single year. So Billy Butlin was offering you to sort of step through the screen, as it were, and enjoy one of the most modern, fashionable places to holiday, as opposed to the sort of traditional resorts that might have some modern architecture, but were generally Victorian in their overall feel. So it's quite different to that. And this is an aerial view from the first brochure of what it was going to look like. As you can see here, the design is all of a piece. It's all actually out of Billy Butlin's imagination, and its entire aesthetic was contemporary. The very idea it embodied was a modern one. Billy Butlin described his sites as holiday villages by the sea. So they had a quite different feel to existing resorts that had grown organically over time, So that was part of the appeal. And the language he used to describe the first camp at Skegness is interesting. So this is on the Lincolnshire coast. And he promoted his vision via the Skegness News in 1935, promising an ultra-modern development, the cleanest, healthiest, happiest, and most modern camp in the British Isles. Its layout would be reminiscent of a modern aerodrome, that most glamorous of interwar travel locations, combined, however, with the more homely sounding, yet equally aspirational miniature garden suburb. And I'm going to come back to that later. On approaching Skegness, one writer described the finished effect. Away down there to the right, filling the wide strip of land between road and the sea, is a vast estate, a veritable township of cool white buildings, tiny houses and exquisite gardens. And here are some pictures from Picture Post on August the 5th, 1939, showing the campers and parts of the camp. The activities were as modern as the design. There was this I'm sure you're aware, the craze for physical jerks, as they called it. And that was well catered for, as you see in the top right corner. There were top dance bands packing the Viennese ballroom every evening. And the site was originally designed to accommodate 1,000 guests. But it was so successful that within a year, the investment had doubled to £100,000. And the site actually covered more than 48 acres. And that's why they needed that little streamlined land train to transport both the campers and their luggage. And I think the sort of the sunburst on the front of that and the streamlined, I'd love to see what colour it was, but it's just an attractive looking thing, isn't it? You also see in the bottom left the headquarters of Radio Butlin. It did become something of a standing joke in later years, but it was highly original and innovative at the time because they were using the public address or PA system, which was a British invention. And Butlin's Skegness was one of the earliest customers for Tannoy's high-powered outdoor equipment, which was developed the same year that Butlin's opened. By 1939, its daily broadcast could be heard by 4,500 campers at a time. So every Saturday, 4,500 people would come afresh to Butlin's at Skegness. And this is where they would dine. This was the kitchen, which would serve up all those meals every single day, in fact, 4 times a day, because if you see the menu in the bottom, they offered breakfast, lunch, tea and supper. So that all-inclusive price is a really good deal. And the dining halls and kitchens were meant to give that impression of quality and modernity as well. You've got those globe lights and the huge floor-to-ceiling metal-framed windows letting in that health-giving sunlight. So there are separate tables here like you have in a posh hotel, you know. So this was all about that affordable luxury element. And actually, if you see the chef on the left-hand side there, he was part of the advertising himself. He was called Jovial Joe Velic. He was Czech, and he was one of the first celebrity chefs, arguably, because since 1930, he appeared in over 200 films. Still remained a chef, but he was a celebrity chef. And so people would have their photographs taken with him when they could go in and actually look around these kitchens, because all the stainless steel was such a marvel of the era, this mass catering that really stepped up a gear with the new techniques and innovations, etc. And they could go and meet Jovial Joe. When Butlin came to expand, which he did very quickly, the simplest option would have been to just replicate the design of Skegness. But he took the different view that to encourage repeat visits to different camps, he would make them look different but feel sort of similar. And that's what he did throughout the other buildings that he put up after the war as well. So this is the 1938 reception block at Clacton, which is a bit more overtly Art Deco in its stepped gable with that facade, and it paired flat render with brick curtain walls. And here we see it again in this image. It's a railway poster by the LNER. Clacton was chosen as the site because Billy Butlin had already acquired land there for an amusement park. Just as importantly, the Essex resort was served by the London and North Eastern Railway, and Billy Butlin had already made a unique publicity deal with them, because when in 1937 they created a poster for the camp at Skegness, that made Butlin's the only private concern to effectively attain holiday resort status as far as joint advertising with a mainline railway was concerned. That was quite a coup. If you think of all these wonderful iconic railway posters being at stations on the platforms through the 1930s, and in among all the resorts is Butlin's, you know, that is a massive advertising dream, really, and he managed to do that. And this is such a fantastic image by the artist Joseph Greener. But it's not just the Butlins. What makes this such a key advertising image, I think, is that diver. It's so evocative, and the kind of central motif, and that I think is linked to others of the era. So this stylized figure had an important and highly recognizable precedent, as you can see here in the logo of the American company Janssen, who adopted the Diving Girl logo from 1920 to market what they called the suit that changed bathing to swimming. the costume and the streamlined depiction of it were all part of the altered attitude towards physical beauty in the interwar years, glorying good health, the display of flesh, and the fashion for sunbathing. And as these cover images on the right show, the svelte bathing bell became a highly influential theme in popular culture. So we've got the Western-super-Mare brochure and the Southern Railway's hints for holidays there. After the building of Clacton, the other buildings that were added to Skegness holiday camp by Billy Butlin used that same combination of materials I've talked, the render and the brick. But the first of these wasn't originally intended for Butlins at all. In 1938, the Empire Exhibition opened at Glasgow, and Billy Butlin had won the amusements concession to operate a 16-acre site amid modern pavilions. And I think there is the amusements park. It's down in one corner, but that's the overall site. These are some of the amusements, and this one in the top right hand corner, I love all that wonderful sort of decoration on that ride. And then there's a speedway, the new motorcycles, just the latest in amusement novelties here. When the exhibition closed and the buildings were dismantled, Billy Butlin actually bought the theatre from the site, and here it is. He had it taken down brick by brick and shipped to Skegness, where with a seating capacity of 2,000, it became one of the largest provincial theatres in the country. As you can see, it's brick with these rendered entrance and Art Deco fins along either side. And here we go, the spacious interior. Now, it survived until 1999, and I just wish I'd known to campaign to try and save it, but it was knocked down to make way for the Skyline pavilions. If you've been near a Butlins, you'll know they have these kind of umbrella-y type, I call them pneumatic meringues. They're kind of like these great big domey things. But anyway, that's what replaced this lovely 1938 theatre. Under construction at the same time, next to the theatre, was this building, the Ingomells Hotel, which opened in 1939. And that was to cater for guests who wanted the Butlins experience, but could only stay for a few days. The whole premise of the holiday camp was that people stayed for a week and they had that changeover, but not everybody could stay for that long. And so in order to cater for those people who would come for a few days, they had this hotel where they stayed, but they could go into the holiday camp and enjoy all the activities and the entertainments, etc. The H-shaped building, as you can see here, it cost £50,000. It could boast its own concert hall plus 68 bedrooms, which were apparently simple but elegant in their decorative scheme of rose, pink and green. The furniture was solid walnut, and at a time when cruising was the ultimate in luxury, the beds were said to be similar to those on the liner Queen Mary. Every bedroom had a telephone, electrically regulated heating, hot and cold water, and an up-to-date bell system for summoning assistance. My favourite bit is this wonderful, very vivid and energetic figure above the entrance in full Art Deco style. Sadly, we don't know the artist who was responsible for this, or indeed the architect who designed the camp. All of the Butlins structures came out of Butlin's imagination, but he did employ architects. And there was one architect, a chap called Robert Cromie, who was a cinema architect, who was apparently working with Butlin around this time. So perhaps it could have been him. I just haven't been able to pin it down yet. But certainly we know he was working with architects, because this on the left is an architect's impression of the next camp that was going to be built at Filey Bay, so very close to Scarborough, on the Yorkshire coast. And as you can see, it was supposed to open in Whitsun 1940. Of course, it had to wait another 5 years until it could actually be completed. But it's interesting to see this design for it. And on the right, the Empire Theatre there as it was built. The view is on the left is very formal and linear. It's designed to whet campers' appetite because it was published in the camp brochure in 1939. It had these large theatres and ballrooms, sort of imposing without being too daunting. And the structures, I think, sort of belong to a trend in civic architecture, which was inspired by developments in Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden. So it's clear that Billy Butlin is aware of architectural trends. He's interested and he's keeping himself up to date. Now, back to those chalets and that idea of miniature garden suburb. I've talked a little bit about the communal buildings, but it's also crucial to note that whereas those had a sort of unornamented flavour of international modernism and Art Deco, the so-called Elizabethan chalets very clearly did not. Billy Butlin was pitching his holiday package at what he called the great mass of middle-income families for whom no one seemed to be catering. So these were the people who were enjoying the benefits of a housing boom, fashionable new consumer goods like radios, even the possibility of growing car ownership. And if those people could appreciate the sleek modernism of public buildings, they generally didn't want to live in them. So by far the most popular choice for the suburban home was this one on the right-hand side, as just an example, new ideal homesteads. I mean, you can see these kind of buildings all over the country in suburban Britain, this kind of gabled timber frame mock Tudor. And that's what Billy Butlin therefore gave his customers. He laid out these chalets. You can see an architect's drawing on the left-hand side. They in streets, effectively. They were 10-foot square, each hut. They cost £10 to construct. They had simple deal frames filled with expanded metal lathing, covered in 2 coats of cement render. So they're not really very well insulated. They really are only for the summer. And that doesn't sound very luxurious, but the point was that you had your own key. You weren't under the thumb of the seaside landlady. You could come and you could go. And that was really, really important, because seaside landladies didn't start giving keys out until the 1950s. So this really felt like it was something new and indeed liberating. And here we see Billy Butlin outside some of his first chalets at Skegness. And I really like this picture because it's clear he's tried to individualize some of them. He's got this kind of stone design and the one directly behind him. I think he ran out of time in doing this over all of them, and he had to simplify. But there was this intention to make them all individualized. Later on, excuse me, that would be done by just different paint colors. He also wanted them, this idea of the garden suburb, he wanted them to have their own sort of garden spaces. So he planted lots of roses. When they didn't grow in time for the opening weekend, he had his staff paint roses up the walls of the chalets. I just think that's a lovely story. You know, he really wanted people to feel like they were stepping into this special place. And here we have a home of your own beside the sea. That shows you what they look like inside. I mean, they are extremely simple, but the idea was that you weren't going to spend too much time in them, but you had this open space outside as well, as you can see with that family there. And if you look closely, you'll see there is this fantastic Art Deco sunburst painted onto that chalet in the center there as well. They had communal, they didn't have any toilets, they weren't en suite or anything. They did have cold water in them, but you had to queue, you had to go to the communal bathrooms. But apparently the first 600 chalets at Skegness were served by 60 marbled bathrooms that they said were as good as the best London hotels. I mean, as I said, he was very good at promotion, whether that was true or not. But he did stress his comfort in all the chalets, and the design was important. They had latterly Billy Butlin designed his own fabric for the curtains in the chalets, things like that. But he knew that people wanted to come and enjoy themselves, and spending money in his bars was a big and useful extra addition to his profits. So the design of the bar spaces in particular was very important. And that relied a great deal on the suspension of disbelief by his campers. So I just need to show you some of these and you'll see exactly what I mean. Most of his campers came from urban areas, so the traditional country pub had a real allure. This is, as you can see, Ye Oldie Pig and Whistle Inn, and this gentleman here in the pinstripe, this is Billy Butlin demonstrating how approachable he is. He's a man of the people. He may be the owner, but you could go and meet him in the bar, and that actually was true. This was supposed to be a perfect reproduction of an old English inn with mullion windows, spreading oak tree, wishing well, and tankards. So you can see the oak tree, and this is all, you know, plaster of Paris, papier-mâché. This is all fakery, but it's the beginning of theme bars, and they're certainly not a new invention. Here we have the Dungeon, at Butlins Holiday Camp in Skegness. And the other one, I think, is the Smuggler's Bar at Clacton on the right. So it's supposed to be below deck on a pirate ship. And you can see the things hanging down. We've got the sort of portcullis above the bar in the dungeon, the skulls and the skeletons. And these were really great fun and part of what made the holiday. But there was also this very chic, more sophisticated element. So look here, the last word in American cocktail bars was also available at Skegness. And there's this lovely quote I came across when I was researching the book about a lady who went to Butlins and saved up all year so that she could have a cocktail every night in the American cocktail bar. And, you know, you can imagine these people getting dressed up and really enjoying that experience. And I just love this picture that someone has colorized. Other one is the Horseshoe Lounge, a space that absolutely exploited the highly aspirational ocean liner aesthetic. According to the Observer, it was streamlined, chromium-plated Odeon cinema modernismus, a pet decor of Butlins. It wasn't a wholly complimentary description, but it showed how clear the link to cinema design was for contemporaries and how likely it was to appeal to the audience for which it was intended. Now, you'll see there's an advert in the bottom right there. The tubular steel chairs are, of course, key to the overall look. And we know who manufactured them because Billy Butlin was very canny about getting the best deal from his suppliers. You know, he'd get money off because he'd offer them advertising in his brochures. This ad for PEL appeared in the 1939 Clacton programme, linking their product to the Butlins brand in what was a very mutually beneficial relationship. Although it's clear that commercial holiday camps were carefully designed, I hope we've shown that, they weren't generally considered well designed by the architectural press. There were several articles in the Architectural Review looking at foreign models because it was clear that as more Britons gained the right to paid holidays, particularly in the wake of the 1938 Holidays with Pay Act, for the first time legislating for holidays to be paid, traditional resorts just wouldn't be able to cope with the extra influx. And so holiday camps were seen as part of the answer. But there was already a certain snobbery implicit in descriptions of places like Butlins. Two camps did receive critical acclaim, and the first one of those is this one, Rogerson Hall. Again, it's at Corton near Lowestoft, one of that group I mentioned earlier. It was built by Travco. That was a joint endeavour by the Cooperative Wholesale Society and the Workers' Travel Association. So again, it's a union camp. They planned to build 6 camps for families lacking the means to visit commercial sites. But because the war came, this was the only one that actually opened. It had a strikingly modern design and it could accommodate 300 people. So it was on the relatively small side. The Architectural Review described it as a pioneering project, which had not gone very far beyond the obvious and immediate response to planning requirements. But in this very fact, and in the absence of any architectural mannerisms, it provides a very fortunate standard for any buildings of this type which may come after it. The fact that the architect has organised its chalets into unified blocks alone represents a great advance on the rows of individual shacks found in most speculative holiday camps. So he's basically saying those Elizabethan chalets of Billy Butlins are shacks. So I think that tells you a lot about his opinion of holiday camps per se, the writer of this article. Each person who stayed at Rogerson Hall for a week or more could nominate a deserving case for a free holiday. So it had this sort of philanthropic ethos to it. Unfortunately, that didn't last long. And very soon they were getting bookings from sort of white collar school teachers, civil servants, that kind of level of social level. Here is the other one that was architecturally acclaimed. This is Prestatyn Holiday Camp. And this probably had the most architectural credibility. It was actually the subject of extensive articles in both the Architect's Journal and the Architect and Building News. It was, as it says here, a joint venture between Thomas Cook Limited and the London Midland Scottish Railway, designed by the LMS architect William Hamlin. Like Rogerson Hall, it was to have been the first of a chain of camps, but again, the war happened, and so only this one was built. At the opening ceremony, Lord Stamp dubbed it the everyman's luxury hotel. So that sense that Billy Butlin was trying to achieve of the affordable luxury again. In reality, the price was aimed at Thomas Cook's existing middle-class clientele. And that's interesting to note, because the weekly price was similar to the £3.13 and sixpence, or 3.5 guineas, charged by Butlins at Skegness. So that is the level that they were both pitching to. So as I said, value for money, not a cheap holiday. The open-air heart of the camp, you can see on the right, was called the Sun Court, where a kiosk was surrounded by coloured parasols and fountains and was overlooked by a 60-foot high observation tower. To one side of that was the reception block, and to the other, a massive structure comprising a dining room with a space for all 1,750 guests, and a ballroom for 600 couples. So definitely a step up in terms of size, not as big as Butlins, but definitely bigger than those other much smaller ones I've been talking about. And here we see a coloured view of it, probably from the 1940s, to give you a sense of where it fits in. And you can see the town of Prestatyn there just next to it. But this is a resort on its own. And here are those chalets. Indeed, your chalet is your castle, said the original opening year brochure. The flat roofed chalets came in 3 different types. There were singles, doubles, and the larger type was for a married couple with 1 child. So they're sort of for families, but only really small families at this point. And I love this. This is from the same brochure. At your service, these are some of the people who were on site to make your holiday wonderful. I mean, they are so wonderfully Hollywood gorgeous in that sort of chiseled look that they all have, the swimming instructors, the tennis coaches. I mean, you'd swoon if they actually looked like that. And the housekeeper and matron are rather more fitting for their description. But I just think this is a brilliant depiction of that era of, you know, this kind of ideal of what you'd want these people to look like. I dare say they didn't at all. The Prestatyn camp also had its necessary outdoor swimming pool, and next to it, this building called the Prestatyn Clipper, a ship-shaped bar that capitalised on the fashionable ocean liner aesthetic. Inside, it actually featured salvage from an ocean liner, plus bollards from a Newfoundland schooner. And outside, as you can see on the left, was this rigging on the roof with a teak deck for playing quoits. So you could actually, you're next to the sea, you can imagine yourself looking out across the water and being on that ocean liner that, you know, really you don't have a hope in being able to ever pay for, because that's really for the upper classes. That sort of modern ocean liner style proved particularly popular at the seaside. And here are some examples. Of course, the Delaware Pavilion at Bexhill is an icon of the era, but it spawned more of this modern building type around the coast. And the Marine Court at St Leonard's beneath it was so specifically modelled on the Queen Mary that they actually had in the foyer when you walked in a scale model of the ocean liner, so that you could compare and contrast with the building and the ocean liner. And then at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, the architect Joseph Emberton created the casino here with the funnel and the very clear references to an ocean liner. And these are buildings that all survive, importantly. At Middleton Tower Camp on the northwest coast, the owner there, a chap called Harry S. Camier, went one step further. His first phase opened with 800 chalets in August 1939, and the local press reported how the main buildings had been constructed to represent the decks of liners with masts and funnels on the roof, as you can see here. And I love the fact you're seeing this from the water, because you really get a sense of the way it's designed to look like a ship. To add to the nautical effect, panelling and furnishings from the luxury liners Berengaria and Leviathan have been used for the Sun Lounge, Palmport Ballroom and Banqueting Hall. And here, down in the bottom, is a postcard of, I think, the ballroom. And so that's where some of the panelling was used. And you can also see on this 1955 brochure, it's offering a weekly cruise at Middleton Tower. The Berengaria was at one time the largest passenger vessel in the world, and so actually having the fittings from an actual liner, you know, gave Middleton Tower this kind of transatlantic glamour, and it sold itself as cruising on land, which is absolutely marvellous. But probably the most unique of all the camps built in this period was this one, Squires Gate, just south of Blackpool, which took its architectural inspiration directly from Hollywood. Its owner, Herbert Pye, who you can see in the top left, had actually lived on the American Pacific coast, and he was inspired by the buildings he saw there. So he bought an existing camping ground near Blackpool, and he transformed it with the addition of these Spanish mission style buildings. In 1937, the Lancashire sweetheart, Gracie Fields, opened the new camp chapel, and then touring the campsite, complete with its 1,400 chalets, she declared, "You aren't half going to be posh here." And I apologise for my Lancashire accent, but you know, this felt like somewhere different. Even a movie star was saying that you're going to be posh staying at Squires Gate. 2 years later, a huge new dining hall, grand piazza and bar were added. And here you can see this is a post-war image of the main building from a brochure. It just gives you a sense of how different it was really to the others. And this is the lavish ballroom that was designed by Andrew Matsey, who was art director of Gaumont Film Company. So it's not just using the sort of Hollywood, Los Angeles, California building style, is actually employing a man who works in movies doing set design to design some of the spaces as here in the ballroom. And Matsey also, he lived in Blackpool, and he designed this fantastic space, the Spanish Hall at the Blackpool Winter Gardens, and some other spaces there too. And if you haven't been to Blackpool and you haven't been to the Winter Gardens, you really need to go there because they're absolutely fantastic. And there's an Art Deco opera house in that complex as well. That's to get off the point. But the only other holiday camp building that used that Spanish mission style was this one. It was the Rendezvous Club at Wallace's Caton Bay camp near Scarborough. I mean, the idea of these sort of Californian styles being appropriate to either the northwest or northeast coast of England is extraordinary in some ways. And I don't know when this one was built, but the Wallace family took over in 1946. I think this was already probably there. By the summer of 1938, Britain had around 150 holiday camps, and most of those were set up in the preceding few years. It was estimated they could accommodate about 40,000 people at a time, but then in 1939, even more opened. And I hope that I've shown how crucial their design could be in attracting more clientele. This was even true on the smaller sites. So just going to end with two final examples. Here's one, the Seacroft Holiday Camp at Hemsby. I'm showing both the reception building and the ballroom. This one opened in 1920 across the road from another holiday camp. Again, it's in that Norfolk-Suffolk cluster. But because it was so close to the competition, they needed to make sure they've got facilities that could really attract people. And so in the 30s, when it changed hands, they really went to town on the ballroom. Now, I'm not arguing that this is high-end design, but it's designed for ordinary people. And the patterns and the sunburst there on the stage could be from no other era. Then here we have the Lido Holiday Camp at Rustington in West Sussex near Littlehampton. And that absolutely proclaimed its modernity in its name, the Lido, the sort of open air archetype of the era when so many of these outdoor pools were built. I think it's 180 around the country between 1930 and 1939. This camp was opened in 1936, and it was unusual for having double-decker chalet blocks, as you can see on the left-hand side. And of course, it had the all-important bathing pool at the heart of the camp. So what happened to all these places? Well, after the war, Fred Pontin set up his holiday camp business, but his model wasn't to build new. It was to buy up existing camps and effectively rebrand them. So by the 1970s, he got an extensive chain and actually owned most of the pioneering 1930s sites that I've mentioned this evening. So we've got Pontin's Tower Beach. Well, that is the Prestatyn holiday camp near Rhyl. Pontin Seacroft, it's the one with the ballroom I just showed you. Middleton Tower, they still kept that idea of the cruise. on their badges in 1962. Squires Gate here was taken over by Pontins in 1961. But as you can see from this relatively recent image, it was completely rebuilt. Sadly, there is almost no architectural legacy left of this 1930s phenomenon. The chalet that I showed you on the 1930s Butlins slide, that one sole chalet survives at Skegness, and it's grade 2 listed because of its rarity. But that's pretty much it. As I said, the theatre at Skegness was demolished in 1999, and everything else has kind of gone the way that the Prestatyn camp is no more. There's a housing estate on it. I think Squires Gate, in fact, is gone now as well. But what I'd like you to take away from this evening is that holiday camps are a really underappreciated part of our shared history. They've been enjoyed by millions of people over the years, but because of a kind of inherent snobbery towards their form of mass enjoyment, they've rarely been given due significance, and certainly not in kind of design terms. They helped bring deco, streamlined, modern design to a vast audience. And also they provided an annual break from the workaday routine that was packed with fun, community, friendship, the opportunity to take part, or as these people are doing, just to relax. And I think that's something that we should celebrate a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kathryn. That was an evocative and almost emotional talk from my point of view, having holidayed at Butlins in the 1960s. Obviously, the legacy, they were built, before the Second World War, so the architecture, the style was still there. While people are typing their questions, we had one or two comments earlier on which we can forget about for now, because that was some technical issues about people not being able to see properly, but I think they were resolved. So a question I'm going to ask you, and I mean, you ended on the reputation of the holiday camp and the legacy. TV series Hi-de-Hi came along. What do you think that did to the reputation of holiday camps? Did it enhance it or did it ruin it?
It was a really difficult one for the holiday camps to deal with, in particular Butlins. I mean, it was filmed at the Warner's holiday camp at Dovercourt. But of course, in the 1980s, when they were filming it, they were looking back to the 1950s, weren't they? Which was a kind of heyday of the holiday camps. But that wasn't where the holiday camps wanted their audience to be. They didn't want their audience to think that if you paid to go to Butlins, you'd go back and meet Ted Bovis and all that kind of old-fashioned stuff. So I think it was done with great love and humor by the people who wrote the series. And I grew up absolutely loving Hi-de-Hi, but Butlins hated it. And that was at the point where they were rebranding as holiday centres, holiday resorts, anything but holiday camps, basically. And they did have some advertising in the 1980s where they closed down 2 of their camps, the older ones at Clacton and Filey in 1983. And as part of their advertising to demonstrate how new and modern Butlins was, the new investment that they were putting in, they actually blew up on camera the dining halls and chalets at some of these places. And they got, I think, some of the stars of Hi-de-Hi to go and, press the button to do this, because they wanted to say, that's not us anymore. We've moved on. So it was a bit of a tricky one for them, really, because there was a lot of affection. I think the people who watched those programs felt great affection for Butlins, but it wasn't the right image for the company at all.
I again, like you, I enjoyed this program, but it was nothing like my recollection of Butlins in the 60s. The dining halls, I had never experienced anything like that before. And I remember on a morning they had this big wheel, and they'd spin the arrow, and whichever numbers it stopped at, that table got a bottle of champagne for dinner that evening. So there's excitement, and they were innovative as well. The chair lifts, cable cars by the name, and the monorail at Skegness. It's the only time yet to this day that I think I've ever been on a monorail.
Those monorails, they came in the 60s, and they were so innovative. Billy Butlin had seen one, I think it was at a Disney resort in America. He'd seen it, and he decided that he would come home and make it. So he had his craftspeople make it. and
Yes.
civil engineers actually came to Butlins to look at it because it was the first of its type in the country.
Yeah, I remember the photographers used to come onto the stations and take photographs, and I wasn't aware what was going on, but my mum and dad both said, quick, look out the window. So my mum, dad and brother leaned out the window, but me being me, leaned out the other side, so I'm not on the photograph. Right, some questions from the audience then. Dash, I think it's Dash 5, says, hello, Kathryn, what would you say was the single most persuasive component of the appeal of holiday camps in the eyes of users? Was it value for money, novelty, innovation, aspiration, a cocktail of all these, or something else? Also, and forgive me for a second question, why weren't there rural holiday camps to exploit countryside access? Was proximity to the sea a fundamental element of the camp ambience?
Yeah. So to answer the first bit of that, I think the most persuasive thing is probably something that would be perhaps the least important to us now. And I think that that is probably the community element. I think the value for money was important, but you know, you had to be quite well off to go to Butlins. Definitely novelty and innovation in terms of Butlins was something that would definitely be high up on the agenda if you were going back year after year. But for most holiday camps, they didn't have that sort of quality of changing interest. So actually people went back time and time again because they enjoyed taking part. They enjoyed meeting new people, or indeed going back and seeing the same people year after year from other parts of the country that they'd made friends with in the chalet next to them 10 years ago, and they watched each other's children grow up.
Yeah.
And they dressed up in fancy dress and they did the competitions, and the grannies took part in the glamorous granny competition, and the men rolled up their trousers and showed off their knobbly knees, and the young women competed to be the holiday princess, or whatever it was called, in the beauty contest. And that all seems very old-fashioned to us now, but that was all, it was all about, you know, being part of that community, and that was crucial to the success of the holiday resorts. Because if you think particularly for Butlins, let alone anywhere else, 4,500 people coming on a Saturday, that's a village turning up every weekend. How do you get those people to interact and have a good time without feeling lonely in a crowd? Well, you have all these competitions and sporting events where people take part. You make them part of a house, sorry, like in schools you had different color houses and things, so you had a team to cheer for. And you have the redcoats, of course. You had these people who were kind of icebreakers and who introduced people. So I think probably that community spirit is probably the most important, actually. From everything that people say and from their memories, that's probably the overriding thing. The question about whether there were any rural holiday camps, well, I have come across information that Billy Butlin was thinking of building one in Forest in Northumberland at one point. But actually, the thing was that when you thought of going on holiday in the 1930s, it meant the seaside. You know, traditionally holidays were spent at the seaside. More people were going hiking and youth hosteling in the 30s, and so those were new trends that were coming on board. But mass market terms, it was the seaside. You wanted to go to the beach for your holidays, and that's why almost, I would say probably always 90%, if not more, of the holiday camps were by the coast, because that's where people expected to go, but also that's where the traditional links are. They may be going using new motor transport and things, but the rail links are there for other people. Billy Butlin actually had his own railway stations built after the war at Pwllheli in North Wales and Filey on the Scarborough coast. So lots of people still were travelling by train. So it's that link, it's that infrastructure in part, and it is that traditional desire to go to the seaside when it's holiday time.
Yeah. I think there's another aspect of this as well. My parents felt it was safe for children because you couldn't get out. You were in enclosed camp, you know, there were metal gates and fencing around, so they could let us off the leash a little bit. You know, we could go and play on the fun fair and the joy rides all afternoon, and they knew where we were, and they knew we were safe. And 4 of us would go to the cinema on our own on an evening when Dad went dancing or whatever. So there was that element to it as well. 1 or 2 people, very complimentary, of course, speaking for all of us. Deborah, absolutely fantastic, thank you. And then, I'm not sure how you pronounce this, Dare or Dairy Farnan. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. Which she actually goes on, or here goes on to say, which would be your top recommendation of a camp to visit to get a real sense of the era and where a lot of the original style remains, if there are any?
Well, that's the thing. Sadly, there aren't really. I mean, that Brystone holiday camp where I mentioned that the original chalets do survive, that's clinging on. But friends of mine went to visit on the Isle of Wight quite recently, and they said it's really not looking in great shape. They're using it as a caravan park, so people are just bringing on their caravans now, so people aren't really staying in the chalets, and if they're not maintained, then they're very simple structures, so they're just gonna, you know, kind of fall down, unfortunately, if they don't fall into the sea first. So I was really hopeful that that might have got listed status, and therefore, you know, could have been turned into this kind of 1930s holiday camp experience, which would just, you know, I'd go, but it would have been really good fun. But they're just, all holidays and resorts and camps, they relied on novelty. And so if you wanted people through the door, you could not keep that stuff. From the 1930s, in the 1960s, it was looking really old-fashioned, and by the 1980s it was really, really old-fashioned. So they just got rid of it, and so there isn't really anywhere where you can properly go and experience it, sadly. I wish I could say there was, but no, there isn't.
I think they'd have a lot of heritage value if they still existed.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think about Dreamland in Margate, where they've turned it into a sort of vintage theme park using all the old rides, you know, but things have to stay long enough for the nostalgia to become good nostalgia, and in the case of the holiday camps, it never made it that far.
Okay. Moira, I don't have a question. Will I say thank you for such a fascinating talk? Duncan, thank you very much, Kathryn. That was marvellous. Had a few stays at Butlins in Ayr, which I only remember going on the dodgems repeatedly, and also at Prestatyn, but was a toddler and can't remember at all. And I think that is one of the things, you although you had to queue to go on the ride, you didn't have to pay. They were all inclusive, and you could stay on and go around on the Big Dipper and the dodgems until you made yourself sick, which I invariably did as a kid. Yeah.
Actually, just to come back to the sort of experience of places, it is interesting that Butlins recently, in their new investment in the 3 remaining sites at Bognor Regis, Skegness and Minehead, the new buildings that they've put up are Art Deco in style. So they are referencing, and they are now proud of their 1930s heritage. And I did go to the Bognor Regis camp with my children last year for just a day, and we went to the new swimming pool, and it's got all the it's got a fountain that's based on the aerator in the 1930s open air pool. You know, they've referenced all these the design features, and that's really lovely to see that they are sort of proud of their heritage. It's not the original stuff, but they have seen that there is value in that, at least. So
very good. Emma says, a question. Thank you, Kathryn. That was excellent and so informative. Wondering what the chalets on the Isle of Wight are currently used for, and if you know anything about the work happening at the former Butlin site at Weymouth.
Well, as I mentioned, the Isle of Wight ones are really not very much in use now. I think one might be a laundry or something. As far as Butlins at Weymouth goes, there wasn't a Butlins at Weymouth. Interestingly, Billy Butlin did speculate on building a site there, and Weymouth was really quite put out when he went elsewhere, but he chose Bognor Regis and Minehead. That was in the early 1960s. So there wasn't one at Weymouth, but if you mean the big one that's sort of at the end of the bay, which is in Bowleys Cove, and it's a fantastic sort of arched building which sort of spreads across the bay, and it's got a central tower and wings on it, and that was called the Riviera Hotel, and that became a Pontins. I know that one, it's a bit dicey, I think, on that one at the moment. It's a listed building, at least. It is still there, and fingers crossed will still stay there, but I don't know what's happening in terms of its use. I think that the 20th Century Society are keeping a close eye on that one.
Okay. Penny, not a question, but a comment that I was at Butlins Bong just last week, and you definitely still see and experience the community atmosphere. So obviously still getting that right. I mean,
I mean, Butlins is, it's still got something about it, definitely, even if the old buildings aren't there.
And for children, the red coats were great fun. I remember one called Larry. I'm still using his jokes in my repertoire today. And then there were the sporty ones, you know, and you didn't have to be sporty. The Noblinese contest, the tug of war for the dads and what have you. And then I think we'll make this the last one. Trish, really interesting, informative and entertaining. Thank you. And as I said before, I think that sort of comment speaks for us all when expressing that sentiment.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you all this evening.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed, Kathryn. It's been great. And oh, hang on, somebody just raised their hand. I don't know why. Kelly and Emma. I think they might be clapping. It says raise their hand.
Well, that'll do. Thank you.
It says they've raised their hands, and I have no way of finding out what they mean. So thank you. Anyway, for everybody that's online now, and for those who've registered but weren't online tonight, you should get a link tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow to watch this again. And it's Deborah says I'm clapping too. Thank you again. Yes. So all right. So you can relax and watch this again. And Kathryn, you and I can log off now and go and do something else for the rest of the evening. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this evening and booking and supporting the work of the Art Deco Society. And I've just realised I'm supposed to tell you something and I don't know what it is, but never mind. I'm sure that Lucy, our organiser, will follow up with an email in due course. Really scrumming for my notes. Oh dear, I failed. No, I think all I have to do is say thank you. And to book tickets for upcoming events, I found it. But to book tickets for upcoming events, go to the Art Deco Society UK website and look at events. But you already know that because that's how you found this one. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good night.
There are more people clapping, but we'll let them go. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.